Welcome back to another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. Today, my guest is BowTiedMara. BowTiedMara is a Dutch guy who's been living in Argentina since 2005. He's also the founder of SovSpot.com, a website dedicated to sovereign individuals and increased international mobility with really good information on, citizenship by investment, citizenship by descent, and all that good stuff. So welcome to the show, BowTiedMara. How's it going, man?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Where are you in the world right now?
I'm in Buenos Aires at this moment, and I hardly ever move from Buenos Aires, to be honest. Of course, I travel around the country and stuff, but I usually stay put and work from my home base.
So Buenos Aires is the base. I remember seeing recently on Twitter that you have some sort of investment or property out in like the Salta Tucumán area as well.
Yeah, that's correct. That's just a plot in the city of Cafayate, and it's like in the Calchuqui valleys. It's a really nice area filled with vineyards, and yeah, it's just one of the spots that I love in Argentina. So that's what motivated me to get some land there.
And you're growing some grapes out there. You're making wine.
Yeah, well, actually, the Torontes was already planted there, so that just came with the plot, so to say. And they still harvest it, etc. I don't get to drink it myself, but I don't want to cut down those vines because they're pretty old.
So what happens with the grapes? Is it sort of like an income producing property? Are they bottling it up somehow?
So yeah, right now they're just bottling it up. It's like a bigger estancia that has those grapes, but the plot is not big enough to give any sort of returns on that. So I just let them pick it up and do whatever they want with it, and then I get a bottle out of it. Basically, that's it.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
So I was thinking we could start off by you just telling a little bit of your backstory about how you moved from Europe to Argentina.
Yeah, so I was studying Spanish in the Netherlands and Portuguese on the side, and then I just loved everything Latin America, and I also traveled here like quite a bit, and you know then came the point is like, what am I going to do like after I finish my master's? Am I going to stay in Europe, or I'm just going to move somewhere else? And basically that's when I decided to make the move, and of course, it was facilitated by Bunda, so to say, because my Portuguese teacher, she was, my girlfriend at the time, and then she wanted to do a master's in Buenos Aires. So we married in Sao Paulo, then we went to Buenos Aires, and after 3 years we broke up, got divorced, and then I met my current wife a few years later. But yeah, I always stayed in Buenos Aires. I never moved back to Brazil, even though my journey started there. I lived there for about 6 months to a year. And of course, traveled back during those first 3 years. I traveled back almost every 2 months to Sao Paulo. So yeah, Brazil is very near to my heart as well. And I always go back there, have some business there as well. And it also gave me the opportunity to speak Portuguese fluently. So it did help me in a way, that first
Hmm.
relationship.
Okay. And fair to say you're probably married to an Argentine girl.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that was a few years after that. Already very settled at that time here. Started my own company, etc. And then I met my current wife, and we've been together. Let's see, it's been over 12 years now. So yeah, it's been a while. We have two kids.
That's awesome. You're almost from like the previous generation of LATAM travelers or expats, because I think most people, I mean, obviously the most recent generation is just in the past 2 years with the pandemic, maybe. And then maybe what we consider the OGs is anyone who got started kind of like 2012 to 2019 timeframe, but you were way before that.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy if you look at the timeline. from our personal life, because I was not even finished with my master's degree, and then I already moved, and I did the last year remotely. So that was just writing my thesis, and I struck a deal with my thesis director, and she was just like, "Okay, you can do this remotely. I don't care, because you produce quality work, etc." So I just wrote my thesis from Argentina, and that was all cool at the time. And that also sort of started my journey into remote work, because at that time it wasn't as common as now. There were only like a few freelance platforms, and I started out with translations, that kind of stuff, and then sort of moved into other roles as the years went by.
Hmm.
But yeah, I was only 24 when I moved, so I was really young at the time. My parents weren't too happy about the marriage. They were just like, "Yeah, you do whatever." They didn't go to the wedding in Sao Paulo, so that was kind of like a bummer at the time. But in hindsight, I do understand that they had some reservations. They did go to my next wedding though, so like the second one, they did go.
And so, with so many years in Argentina, you can decline to answer this if you want, but are you an Argentine citizen now?
No, I am not. I could do the citizenship procedure. It's pretty easy, especially since I have so many roots here. It's not hard for me to prove. But I'm just a little bit scared of losing my other nationality, because they're kind of like hard on getting a new citizenship. And Argentina does notify the country of origin, and I
Hmm.
just don't want to lose my EU passport, or run that risk, because technically I could, because there's a couple of situations where you can have both, which is when you're married to somebody from that other nationality. But I just have to register the marriage still in Europe, which I haven't done yet. So I just don't want to run that risk. But I'm definitely planning on doing that. Once I register the marriage there, then there's no issue in getting it.
Hmm. And for the listeners, I think I want to talk a little bit just about SovSpot quickly so
Hmm.
that they get a little bit of context on what you're doing in terms of helping people internationalize. And then we'll come back to Argentina and really do like a deep dive on cost of living and pros and cons and all the other good stuff about Argentina. But let's talk about SovSpot a bit because I think it's kind of interesting. So you're basically like compiling information almost to be like a database of different citizenship and residency programs around the world. So you're pretty educated about a lot of this internationalization stuff, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, that's correct. In 2016, I started working with my own company, mainly for migration experts. So that's immigration attorneys, or companies that are sort of visa consultants, and they need to source H&I clients, for investment visas. So from that background, I really grew into learning a lot about all these kind of programs and citizenship options, and that's where eventually I started SovSpot this year. So I started to collect a database of every single option in every single country, and just started building that out. And it's still not finished. I'm writing articles about every single option with
Hmm.
a whole lot of details, and then I just have this country database where you can search on different countries and see the investment options and the amounts associated to those. But it's still very much initial stages, and the idea is to build it out with professionals on the site, and that's actually the monetization of the platform, is having immigration attorneys tied to countries, and visa experts that people can contact directly,
Hmm.
and just be that sort of platform where you can just go, okay, I need to go to this country. Okay, these are the experts that I can contact, and you can just choose. And there should be like a review system where you can see if somebody has bad reviews. And ideally, I would like to have a transparent pricing sort of indicator where you could see, okay, this dude charges like 25K for initial consultation and doesn't do anything else.
Hmm.
Or, this dude offers the whole package for 5K.
Yeah. On your Twitter, your bio says your bio starts with paving the mobility asset highway for the sovereign individual. What do you mean by that?
That is basically the idea that you should be able to move anywhere you want to. Of course, you have to have the means. But most of these programs, if they're like a rentista visa or even digital nomad visas, you don't even need that much money. So that's why I added those as well, and not just the golden visa options that are in the hundreds of thousands. But technically, it's really easy to move somewhere else and start a new life, earn money online, and just live in a low cost country that you really like, which is basically my own road that I traveled without really consciously doing that, because at the time I really suffered. Moving here, I was really dependent on the local economy for a few years, and that's definitely not fun earning in pesos. At a certain point, I came to the realization I need to get out of this negative doom loop of earning in pesos, because this is just not ever going to solve my financial situation. And then I really started focusing on international clients and remote money.
Hmm. So, like, how did you get into the whole internationalization space, or like, where did some of your expertise come from, and what inspired you to build SovSpot.com?
So the expertise started with one of the first clients in that area, which is an E2 visa consultancy in the US. So what they do is they focus on Latin America to get Argentines, Colombians, and Brazilians, if they have an Italian passport, to get the E2 visa, make a substantial investment in the US, usually through a franchise or some other like package deal where they can show, okay, this is a significant investment, get the E2 visa, and then they can move to the US with their families and then renew every 5 years. So
Right.
that was one of the first ones, and then through that business opportunity, I sort of rolled into all the other mobility options out there. Golden visas, Grenada, and a lot of the citizenship options.
So how have you been building out SovSpot? Because I noticed that it like parts of it is like a WordPress website, but then parts of it seem much more dynamic than what WordPress probably offers. And you have all this like filtering and like the database. How's it actually built?
So yeah, the core framework is WordPress, and then I'm working with a listing directory theme, and basically the whole framework is built on different listing types that you can create, and you can set like any kind of data point, and that you can later filter on. So what I did first is create the country listing type, and then afterwards, and now I'm creating the professional listing type for immigration attorneys, and you can have as many data points as you want. And the idea is that if people want to upgrade or claim a listing, then they have to pay like a monthly membership fee, and then they can receive the actual leads coming in. Otherwise, they will just see, hey, you got a lead, but they won't see the lead data. So I'm
Hmm.
currently building that part, because that's actually the hardest part. And once that's up and running, then I'm really going to roll out things pretty quickly, because I have a database of like around 30,000 immigration attorneys right now, and a thousand, or yeah, around 1,200 immigration consultants that I want to publish on that on the page, and then send them a notification saying, like, hey, here's your profile. If you want to claim it, you can get the leads directly. I might want to roll it out in stages just to get some more traffic first, because right now we're in the third month, and we're about like 1,000 visits a month, 1,500 more or less. So I just might want to wait to do like the big push. But yeah, it's definitely going in that direction. I think it will be, an interesting point for those professionals to get more leads on a monthly basis.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's really cool what you're building. I've definitely seen other projects similar to this. I think there's like residencies.io, there's Visa DB. How do you see yourself differentiating in this market?
So yeah, residencies.io is a little bit more like IO, like where they do have a lot of filtering options, etc. But they still do the processing, or at least you have to hire them. And my whole thinking behind this was I don't want to be in the middle of the processing. I want the agent or the consultant to be fully responsible for this whole processing, because I've also worked in some startups, and that for me was like the main bottleneck, where I saw like, yeah, this is not scalable. This is not going to work, because if you get like 100 applications, you're just going to be flooded in work, and you can't take on anything else, because
Hmm.
every application takes time. There's like a ton of paperwork. So that's also the reason why I don't think, at least right now, it's fully. You can't really fully automate this for each single country. So, because I also had people telling me like, "Hey, what you should do is you should,
Build an API.
yeah, build an API for every single country, so you can just directly upload your documents. But every country asks something else, or something, different kind of documents, and it's really
Exceptions
hard.
and
Yeah, so you have to have somebody specialized in each country. That's the ideal situation, and they take it over and do the applications, because it's almost impossible to create a one size fits all for every single option. So yeah, that is going to be the main focus, is just really distributing those leads to the best consultants out there, and not doing it myself. And I
mhm.
think Visa DB, that's the other one that you mentioned. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that.
just two examples I gave, but Visa DB is following a similar model where they're trying to be um, sort of like a catalog of lawyers.
Yeah, I think they're the closest to what I have in mind. I think they offer, right now they have like not so many professionals on their platform, but I think that's sort of the model that I want to follow.
Hmm. Definitely makes sense. So yeah, I guess talking about the residencies and the citizenships, like what do you think are some of the most exciting opportunities right now in Latin America in terms of residencies?
So always Paraguay, just because, well, it depends if you're from the States or not, because you're always going to be taxed in some way with your passport in that case. But Paraguay is still a very interesting option, even with the changes. It's similar to Argentina right now, but of course has a lot more tax benefits. So I would see that as one of the most interesting ones for residency, and then Argentina for a second citizenship, which is fairly easy to do. I mean, you can really get it if you can prove that you have ties to the country with after 2 years of living here. So I think that's a very powerful passport if you think about it. If you already have, for example, an EU passport, you can live in all these EU countries, and if you have the Mercosur next to that, then you can live in all the Mercosur countries. So
Hmm.
that's pretty dynamic. It gives you a lot of geo coverage.
I've seen the I've looked into the Argentine program before, and I had seen a lot of conflicting information regarding whether it was 2 years as a permanent resident or if it was 2 years under like any residency. Because I think it was like 1 or 2 years as a temporary resident first in many situations, and then it converts. And then there was basically conflicting information regarding if the time as a temporary resident counts, something like that. It's been a while since I looked into it, but would you be able to clarify that?
So yeah, I would say that really depends on a case by case basis. I work with a law firm that does a lot of these petitions, with because here you have to petition a judge, and he basically decides if you can get the citizenship or not. In 90% of the cases, they will always say yes. If you can prove that you have enough ties to the country, and are not just out for the citizenship and then leave. Um, but it can really depend on the judge. But usually it shouldn't be an issue after the first 2 years of temporary residency, because then you come into the permanent residency. And if during those first 2 years you already build up sort of your life here, and you can show that on paper, then it shouldn't be an issue at all for you to get it. I mean,
So you think you could go from temp to citizen?
yeah, I think you can go from temp to citizen. And just to be safe, I would build in, some maybe have some property here, some work relationship, or something that can prove that you're not just uh, living here without having any ties to the country.
Hmm. Related question: is it still possible to do visa runs as a tourist and basically just visa run every, I guess, 3 months it is, and stay year round? And because I think, like, historically, at least prior to the pandemic, like, Argentina was one of the only countries where you seem to be able to do that. You seem to be able to just take the ferry to Uruguay, or hop over the border somewhere and come right back, and they were willing to let you in at least a couple times before they started asking questions.
Yeah, you can still do that. You can first you enter the country on a tourist visa, then you can technically extend that at the local police, so you don't even have to go to
Hmm.
Uruguay that first time, and then you can get like another 90 days. After that, you do have to leave the country, but you can usually come back. Maybe now, in the last couple of years, actually since Macri, they started frowning a little bit if you really show like a ton of stamps between Argentina and Uruguay, and they were just like, "Yeah, but dude, you're living here." And but then still, usually you would just have to pay a fine or whatever if you stayed in the country too long, for example, and then it would be fine. So a country that's a lot stricter with that is Brazil. I've had some serious issues there with losing my entry stamp once, and then when I left the country, they said, okay, well, the next time you enter the country, you can have an issue because you didn't have the exit or the entry stamp.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, because they give you this little paper which isn't tied to your passport, and I just lost it somewhere in my luggage.
Hmm.
So then the next time I came to Brazil, first they were almost ready to give me the stamp, and then they looked at my passport, they checked the screen again, they were like, okay, you have to accompany us, and then I had to go to the Polícia Federal, and I needed to pay a fine and basically swear that I would never lose that paper again, and then it was all good. But they did make like a huge fuss about it, and it held me up for like an hour or so. But yeah, Argentina is a lot more lax in that sense. But still, if you're planning on living here for a longer time, it's not that hard to get temporary residency and then permanent residency.
Hmm. I had a pretty popular tweet last week that was like, the gist of it was like, why get residency when you can just overstay and then pay $100 fine when you leave? Do you see validity to doing that? Could that work as a strategy at least once or twice?
Oh yeah, definitely. It all depends on what you want to build up. If you because you can still invest here even if you're not a resident. It might even be better in terms of fiscal responsibilities after the fact. Um, if you're not a resident, the only difference is going to
Hmm.
be when you'll probably be taxed more if you try to sell the property afterwards because you're not a resident. That's the only thing because they have some extra
Mm.
additional impuestos on non-residents. But if you just want to enjoy the country and don't really care, yeah, that's definitely a valid strategy because there's no real repercussion against doing that besides the fine. They won't ban you from entering again or whatever.
Really?
Like
They won't ban you?
no, that's something that they would do in the EU, which also happened once with a friend of mine, and she overstayed actually only by a few days, and they were almost like, okay, we're gonna pretend this didn't happen, but technically, you wouldn't be allowed to enter the EU for the next 5 years. But that stuff doesn't happen here. Like seriously, they will give you the fine, and you can just re-enter again, and no questions
Damn.
asked. Yeah,
What
and I'm
about in
not.
Brazil? I thought in Brazil or in Colombia, from what I've heard, you will get like banned for like a year or two.
I think in Brazil they ban you. Yeah, I'm not sure how long, but I'm pretty sure that if you overstay or if you stay longer than 180 days a year, they will definitely make a huge fuss out of that. And if I recall correctly, that is about 2 years that you can't enter. Colombia, I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Okay, but So Colombia, or sorry, so Colombia, you're not sure. Brazil, probably get banned.
Hmm.
Argentina, you're not going to get banned.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, there you go. This is that insider intel people are listening into the My Latin Life podcast for.
Yes, and then if you do get banned, there's always going to be a way to get back into the country. But I've never ever heard about anybody getting banned, and I've known a lot of expats that lived here and just did. They lived here for like 5 years, and they did like the 3 months Uruguay boat trip every single time, and it was no issue.
That's insane. They didn't even mix it up. It was just always Uruguay boat trip.
Yeah, yeah, always Uruguay boat trip, and on the same day they just went to Colonia, and then they went back on the same day, and that was that.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Speaking of, you said there's ways to get in if you're banned. What would that look like?
Well, that would look like you would need to have some connections, but it used to be a lot easier when the Ministry of Interior wasn't as sophisticated as it is now, because everything is digitalized now. The processing is a lot faster of ID, etc. But I'm not 100% sure how that will work today. But at that time, it was just like, okay, we can just pay a little bit extra, and your documents will be placed on top, so they get fast processing. That's basically what happened with my permanent residency at the time, because I really needed that to get out, because I had to move to or I had to go back to Europe, and if I didn't get that processed, I would basically lose those 2 years of temporary residency.
Hmm.
Because, so I really needed it to get processed, and it was only I had like 2 weeks. And if it was like under normal circumstances, they can take about 2 months for doing that, and they don't have any kind of apuro. So at that time, we just placed a few banknotes in the middle, and then it was all of a sudden it was one of the first ones processed.
That makes sense. What does that have to do with getting banned, though? Like, so say someone does get banned, how could they get back into the country? You're saying that you could basically get them, you could get unbanned with a couple banknotes.
Well, that I'm not sure about, but I could imagine that you could, with the help of a despachante or somebody who is close to the Ministry of the Interior. Of course, that's like a whole different ball game, and it's not going to be easy. But like I said, I've never heard any story of people getting banned for overstaying. They just pay the fine and get back, and it's no issue. So I
Right.
think once they start doing that, we might have a problem in terms of, okay, right now the Argentina really changed, and they're going to be bitches about this, and it's not going to be as easy as before, which I can totally imagine. But at this time, they just need more dollars, so I don't think they're going to make a
Yeah.
huge fuss out of it.
I think what's funny to me is people would just keep doing the Uruguay boat trip over and over again, and they wouldn't even switch it up and like, I don't know, go to Chile through Mendoza or like, I don't know, just mix up your entry points a little bit.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that either. I'd like, yeah, go to Chile, go to Brazil, just go to Paraguay. There's so much points where you could just like leave the country, but yeah, they didn't even care.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Um, Related question. So, like, how porous are some of these borders around Argentina? Because in my mind, like, we all know, or at least a lot of people know that, like, Brazil and Paraguay have a pretty porous open border. You can just walk across, buyer beware. But for the most part it's a bit of an open border there. But in my mind, the Paraguay Argentina border was like pretty locked down, and you can't really just like walk across at any points, and especially because there's a river there. And then I assume with Chile too, I imagine it's like pretty strict. I don't know, maybe if you're like a super athlete, you can just, I don't know, climb over some random mountain. But like, what have you heard about like, being able to just sort of like walk across undetected or enter in a porous way in and out of Argentina?
So yeah, that's definitely possible. Some of the most notorious entry points are with the Bolivian border. That
Hmm.
is like really porous. There's like tons of people crossing from Bolivia every single day. basically attending health facilities and school for free in Argentina, because like public healthcare and school is free here. And they don't have that in Bolivia, or not as high standard. So a lot of these border towns, they basically do all that in Argentina, and nobody stops them or even checks passports or whatever. They just, I think they need to pass a river too, and they just do that, and nobody even looks at that. And then between Paraguay and Argentina, the river, kind of complicates things. But of course, there's a ton of contraband there as well. I mean, the goods go across undetected all the time. I think the easiest one is technically the one between Puerto Iguazu and Foz do Iguazu,
Mm-hmm.
because that has urban bus lines going back and forth, and you really have to say, okay, I want to have my passport stamped, or I need to enter the country for them to stop and go past customs. Because if you don't say that, you can just enter Brazil or Argentina undetected. Now, I'm not sure if that changed under COVID and how that is now. I think under COVID it was a lot stricter. Now they're probably relaxed it again. But whenever I took the bus, I used to take the bus from Buenos Aires to Sao Paulo, like a 36-hour bus ride, just to get
Jesus.
more luggage in. And that was always the issue. Like, okay, this is really like an international bus, etc. But I've been to Puerto Iguazu a ton of times, where I would just take the city bus to Foz, and it wouldn't even stop at the border. They would just go straight to Foz, and you would be in Brazil without
Mm-hmm.
mentioning anything. And it would be, technically, you could say, yeah, it's a day trip for the other side of the park to see the waterfalls, but you're in Brazil, and you basically cross the border without any checks.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So yeah, so you think both the Bolivia one and the Iguazu Brazil one slash Paraguay one could potentially both work?
Yeah, I think the Chile one is just because of geography is a lot harder, and Chile in general is a really pain in the ass with customs and anything that comes in and out of the country. I know that for a fact that it was the only country that, because I had an e-commerce too, sending seeds across the world, and it was literally the only country that would send everything back. And those were like really small packages, and they would scan every single one, and everything would come back up to the point where I just said, okay, I'm not going to send anything to Chile anymore. And it would, it would arrive anywhere, Mexico, Spain, any European country, US, no problem. And the only place that everything returned from was Chile, because it didn't have like the official agriculture stamp for seeds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, can we drill in on the Bolivia Argentine dynamic a little bit? Because I guess your winery or your property is somewhat near the Bolivian border.
Mhm.
And I would love, I know that definitely there's a lot of Brazilian students in Bolivia that study there. And there's really a lot of sort of like international dynamics going on in that area. What else can you tell us about sort of that, like what's going on in northern Argentina and the relationship with Bolivia?
So yeah, the northern part of Argentina there, especially Jujuy, is really similar to Bolivia in a lot of ways. Culturally, in terms of gastronomy, their customs, etc. It's like really almost a blueprint of what you would see in Bolivia. So it's a lot more similar to Bolivia than to the rest of Argentina, so to say. In terms of those border towns, that's the thing that I know happens all the time. And that they would just cross the border and attend to services in Argentina, and sometimes it even happens from Paraguay as well. Like they would actually travel to Buenos Aires if they have like a serious illness or whatever, just because healthcare here is a lot better, the free
Hmm.
version, than in Paraguay. Um, but yeah, other than that, like I haven't lived in that northern part. Like where I have my plot, it's already a lot more Salta and closer to Mendoza in that sense, in between
Hmm.
Tucumán and Salta. So it is a little bit further removed. Plus, it's like one of the most touristic areas, like after Mendoza for wines. And if you would look at the property ownership in terms of percentages for foreigners, that valley, the Calchaquí Valleys, is actually one of the highest percentages after Misiones. Like
Oh, really?
Misiones, yeah, Misiones and Salta are like the two provinces that percentage-wise have the biggest ownership of foreigners owning property there.
And so, in your region, where are these foreigners typically from? Like, what's the mix?
Um, the vast majority is from the U.S. Like in terms of acreage, U.S. is like number one in most of Argentina, and number two and three is Spain and Italy, and then there's like a bunch of Germans, and it goes down like through the rest of the European countries overall. But yeah, the number one investor, like private investor in land, etc., in Argentina is the U.S. It did go down, like the ownership in these the last 10 years, just because of the crisis. I think a lot of people just sold and they were like, okay, I'll take the loss. So there is more available right now because they have like a cap as well per province. There can only
Hmm.
be like 15% of foreign ownership, and if that's fulfilled, then you can't buy any land in that section anymore.
Hmm.
But any province still has like a lot of acreage before getting to 15%. So it's still a lot of opportunities to buy land if you want to buy like a huge plot.
Sure. Yeah. I think when we were talking offline, you suggested talking a bit about investment opportunities in Argentina. What do
Mhm.
you see as being some of the biggest opportunities?
So I think any opportunity here should be seen through the lens of, you should be passionate about it and like it. It's not so much like, oh yeah, I'm going to be super rich with this or I'm going to double my money, which, of course happens in some cases, but you should always keep in mind that this is like a really high risk environment. It's almost like buying like a really low cap shitcoin and hoping, it just does something crazy because the risk is just really, really high right now. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen next year during the elections. So I would just recommend, okay, look for something that you would like to own. Ideally, if it's like a bigger investment, you should be able to monitor it in any ways just to make sure that nobody occupies it illegally, or you should have some control there, or somebody that goes check on the
Hmm.
property, etc. Because that stuff happens a lot here too. If you just leave stuff abandoned, you could get into issues of
Yeah.
ocupas,
Squatters.
squatters, and it's just a pain in the ass, especially if there's a kid involved. It's almost impossible to get those people out, and they will just squat your property. And if they pay the municipal bills or taxes during 10 years, legally, they can even own your property after that. So it could be a real issue. That's why you should really, live here, I think, if you want to buy
So
property or
when you
land.
say it's a shitcoin, do you really think it's that asymmetric of a potential outcome? Like, how low are, I guess how low are the prices, and do you really think it could, 20x or something like that?
No, 20x definitely not. I mean, right now, if you look back over the last decade, more or less, I think prices have gone down since the top, which was during Macri, the first year, second year. Prices have gone down about 40, 50% in terms of houses or house pricing here in the city, and outside of the city, maybe even more. That's why you can find land like relatively cheap, because that's like even less liquid and people really need the money.
Hmm.
So you can find some pretty good deals there. So yeah, best case scenario, we get like the next libertarian president next year, Millet, and we just go full, capitalist, and everything booms. But I don't think that's a very likely scenario. I mean, he does get in the polls. He gets about 25 to 30% in some polls. So it does mean that there's a big shift to more, economic freedom, especially from younger people. but the shift will take a lot of time. I think the seed has been planted, and I think if this goes on, that's only like a really positive development. But it's not that that's going to change overnight. And there's so many policies that they would have to get rid of, that breaking all that down will take time, unless they blow it all up and start over from scratch.
Hmm. So where do you think the opportunity is when it comes to, I guess, real estate? Do you think it's more in like urban real estate in Buenos Aires and other cities potentially, and I don't know, having like an Airbnb in Mar del Plata or something like that? Or do you think it'd be like let's like buy up like a winery for super cheap and I don't know, get to exporting or like
Yeah.
I don't know, like where do you, what's exciting to you?
Well, I mean, that's a really exciting opportunity. The only downside there is that it's a lot of work, and it is you really have to love the whole business of producing wines, etc. And it's really really hard work for not a substantial return. But if you buy, like, right about now, there's a lot of wineries that are for sale. If you love wine, that is a great business to get your hands on. But you really have to be there like 24/7. You cannot buy a winery and get somebody in control and think it'll all work out. Like, it's really hard work. So that's the only downside, unless you like that, and then I would say go for it. I mean, for example, there's another Dutch family called Salentine, and they did exactly this in 2001 after that crisis. I think they right before they bought like a crazy amount of acreage in Mendoza, and then afterwards they bought up a few wineries in San Juan and in Salta as well, and they're like the number one producer almost now. And but it took them about 20 years to get there, and they are really hardworking family. Their wines are some of the best, and they built it all up from buying up all those initial properties in really strategic locations. So you really need to know what you're buying too, because a lot of stuff can be for sale, but you need to check the water access, irrigation rights, all that kind of stuff, which comes with, especially for wine, is very important in those
Hmm.
drier areas. But yeah, it can be a very exciting opportunity, but you have to go for that like 100%. It's not like, okay, I'm going to buy a winery and see what happens. That's not going to happen in that sector,
Yeah,
at
yeah. I
least.
feel like it would take a whole episode to go through it because it's definitely a unique business.
Yeah.
Um,
But
let's talk a bit about.
yeah, no,
Go ahead, sorry.
just to get back on the urban property, I think that is the safest investment in terms of real estate here. So pick a probably Buenos Aires is the safest bet right now, because that's always going to receive a ton of tourists. Airbnb rules might change, or they might tax a little bit more on that, but the appreciation of the property itself is going to be interesting, because right now everything is like minus 30, minus 40% discount. So that's already interesting. And if make it a little bit special, have some nice furniture in there, and really fast internet in a good neighborhood, you're always going to rent it out in dollars. So I think that is one of the best opportunities probably now, to if you want to invest, and it's low
Yeah.
maintenance, because that is something, like, for example, I have a few Airbnbs, and I do not really do anything there myself. I just have that somebody take care of that in a property management structure, and it's really not a headache at all.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. Like I remember there's always this myth that you can get like dope penthouse apartments in Buenos Aires for like 300 bucks in a desirable neighborhood, 300 bucks a month, sick penthouse looking over the city. Is that how realistic is that from a rent perspective? And then how much would like let's just say a two-bedroom penthouse apartment cost to buy?
Well, if you know about those properties, just send them over, because I haven't seen that. No, in general, it's it's not super cheap. It's not like going to any internal city and just buying something there. I would say right now in Palermo, which is of course the number one hotspot for
Hmm.
tourists, it's about $80 for or 80,000 for a studio apartment in a new building. but you could probably find that for 60 as well. And if you have a two bedroom, it's around 120, 130, up into 200,000, depending on the kind of amenities in the building, et cetera. It really depends on a lot of factors, and also like what the owners are looking for. Some people really have to sell and they're hard pressed for money. In those cases, you really go even like a 20% off of the Polish price, or even less, if
Hmm.
you have cash ready to give to them. So uh, also there, if you're here and you can negotiate with the owners, that's always like a plus. You can probably get a better deal than anything you see online.
Hmm. Yeah, because I think what happens is when you're going to buy a place, everything's sort of mark to market in dollars. But when you rent, you can potentially set up a contract that's in pesos, and then that could be more favorable to you over time.
Yeah, so that is the number one benefit of becoming a resident here as well, is that you can rent in pesos. You get a DNI and basically an ID here, and you can get a rental contract in pesos. The only extra thing that you will need is a guarantor, which is something that you can also purchase. There's some it will cost you 1 month or 2 months rent, and then you get that little paper sort of that the property owner needs, and then you can rent it out in pesos. And that is really a big difference. It's like 4x or 5x less than dollar prices.
It's a good tip. Let's talk about just cost of living in general in Buenos Aires. Um, I think everyone's very enticed. They want to know that a steak dinner costs $3 and the bottle of wine is $2 and, and all that. So just tell them like realistically how much it's going to cost to go out to dinner. How much is a fancy cocktail on a rooftop bar, things like that.
So yeah, like a good steak in a good restaurant is probably still gonna set you down back around. Let's see, it's around 4,000, maybe a little bit more. So let's say about $15 max, maybe a little bit more. But that's in a really higher end kind of thing. But you can find anything from $10 to $15 in the middle. A good a beer basically, and any bar right now, a liter of beer is probably around $5, um, something like that. And then yeah, good cocktails. I haven't had a good cocktail in a while, so I would have to check that out for you.
Like
Like
an
what the
Aperol.
yeah, like an Aperol Spritz. Well, the last one that I had was, but of course these prices change so fast. Let's see, it was around 600, so that would be, yeah, it would be about $2. Like really, like the cost of living here, if you start calculating like that, it's like super low in dollar terms. It's hard to spend all your money unless you want to do some really crazy stuff and get a VIP table at boliches every single night. But if you don't do any crazy stuff, it's really hard to blast through your money. Except on rental properties in dollars, those tend to be like very high in comparison to the cost of living.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely remember last time I was in Buenos Aires, like cocktails were super cheap, like $2 gin tonics and stuff.
Yeah, it is getting a little bit more expensive because for some reason the blue dollar is kind of lagging behind right now. So inflation is still soaring, of course, and prices go up in pesos. But then if the peso dollar rate sort of stagnates, then everything becomes more expensive in dollars.
Hmm. So let's talk about like what has kept you, what do you really like about Argentina and what keeps you living there? Obviously, you have a family there now, but like, yeah, like tell me about like what do you really enjoy about Argentina and what maybe keeps you from just bringing them back to Europe or going somewhere else?
So yeah, what I really love is the freedom here. Like you really feel once you live here. Besides everybody always bitching about the government, etc., there's no real state oversight. You feel that you can basically do anything you you want. It has its good and bad things there, but really for me that is one of the main pros. And if I look at Europe, I would just not want to live there anymore, just because of the surveillance system that they're building up. Everything is 100% checked, and yeah, I just don't want to live in that kind of society. It's for me that's really plus like the weather, of course, but that's more of like people can't really help their weather. But yeah, the social aspects as well. Like here, you can just say like on the same day, it's like, hey, should we meet up for a drink or whatever, and people will just have the time for you to meet up with them. Whereas in Europe, it would be like, okay, what about 2 weeks from now? Do you have like a little
Hmm.
point in your agenda that we can we can go to a bar? So yeah, those kind of things like the social aspects, good food overall. It's very affordable, and yeah, I just love that there's like zero oversight, and you can just travel the whole country. You can go wherever you want. There's yeah, not a whole lot of control, and I still feel that here you can, if you have the right budget, you can really build up an empire that it wouldn't be possible in the first world, so to say.
Okay, tell me more about building up an empire. What would that mean to you, or what does that look like?
So having multiple properties, creating passive income streams from that, and the bar is just so much lower than if you would compare it to Europe or the States. Also, because here you would pay most of these things in cash because their mortgages are basically non-existent. So it's really your property, and anything that comes in from that is passive income, and you don't have to pay a mortgage out of that, of course. You do need some startup money for that. But if you live here and you earn enough in dollars, the saving rate is just like insane. I think I save around 95% of my income, more or less. So all that can go to other types of investments that otherwise I wouldn't be able to afford. And that's why if you plan on living here for a longer period, I can definitely recommend just buying your home, your first residency where you live, just because it just saves you so much money in terms of not paying rent in dollars, etc. If you already
Hmm.
have like a chunk of cash and you don't mind paying rent, then that's okay too. But for me, it really makes a difference of like, okay, at least I have this roof over my head, and from this is my base. I can do basically anything I want with the rest of my money, and just save and buy up some other additional properties. And I had a thread once on Twitter too, where I mentioned that if you really start to get ingrained in the country, you meet people that will help you on your way. Some will also try to screw you over. You have to be super careful here because everybody has like their little story that they want to sell you if they sort of sense that you have money. But there's also, of course, really good people that want to help you and that are interested in offering, interesting investment opportunities. So, for example, I was able to invest in a building that was part of a construction company that was going bankrupt, and they needed to sell like all their assets really quickly and sell their whole company to another construction company because they weren't able to maintain it. And
Hmm.
during that sell off, the lawyer helping them with that was basically my friend. And then he said, like, this is a really good opportunity to buy some really cheap property. And it went for, 25 to 30% of the value. Because of course it was a high risk investment because they were still building those buildings, and there's no way of knowing if they would actually finish it. So that is kind of like, okay, we'll see what happens. We consider it as a loss, but at the same time, there, still construction is still going on. It's been like that for a year and a half, and building is almost finished. So once it comes on the market, then you can really cash out and make an interesting difference.
Yeah, that's awesome. What are some of the like the upcoming neighborhoods in Buenos Aires, or where do you recommend people live if they want to get out of the Palermo, Soho, Gringo bubble?
So yeah, I live in Villa Crespo, which is one of the neighborhoods that I really like. It's a little bit more low key. It's close to Palermo, so if you still want to go to all the bars, you can just walk about 10 blocks and then you're there. Colegiales is another very nice neighborhood, also bordering Palermo, which has some really nice apartments, and it's sort of in between Palermo and Belgrano. Belgrano is another neighborhood that I really like. You won't see as many gringos there compared
Hmm.
to Palermo. And then, yeah, if you're really more into like being on your own and you don't really um, want to be inside of the city that much, then Zona Norte is a really nice area. So anything from Vicente Lopez to San Isidro, so outside of the city but close to the river, that whole area is super nice. They have some crazy mansions there. It is not cheap to live there, but it's definitely one of the key residential areas where most of the big CEOs of multinationals, they all live in that area.
Hmm. That's cool. I didn't even consider that north of the city area.
Yeah,
But
and it's only
yeah.
like 30-minute drive from Palermo, or even less, like 20 minutes. So it's technically almost in the city, but you're really far away from all the chaos of Buenos Aires.
Hmm. I also like the Belgrano area too. There's lots of embassies there. Uh,
Yeah, yeah,
Big space.
that's one of my favorite areas too. Like there's some streets there with all those big embassy buildings that it's just like, wow, man, these these mansions are the shit.
Yeah, I played tennis at the Belgrano Athletic Club one time.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great neighborhood.
And then, so I think it's probably worth talking a bit about some of the downsides or cons or things to be aware of for people who want to travel to Argentina. I guess both for kind of digital nomad visitors and then people looking to move there long term. So, if people want to move there or want to maybe spend a month or two there as a digital nomad, what would be some of your biggest tips for that person?
So yeah, one of my biggest tips would be to not flash your wealth. Of course, that's like a tip you can give for the whole of Latin America, but especially in the last couple of years, there's no muggings with guns or whatever like you would have more in Brazil. Even that's like a little bit exaggerated. I never really had any issues in Brazil, but then it happens. But here it's more like pickpocketing and snatching stuff without you even noticing sometimes, or you're walking down the street with your phone in your hand, and all of a sudden this dude on a bicycle just races by and grabs your phone, and then it's gone. That stuff happens like pretty regularly, especially in Palermo and Porto Madero and more tourist areas. So yeah, sitting outside on a terrace with a MacBook, I wouldn't do that fast. I would just stay inside of the bar.
Hmm.
Those kind of small tips where it's kind of annoying to think about that, but at the same time, it's better to take that precaution because otherwise you're just going to be bummed out if they do steal it. So that's something that I always look out for. It actually happened once to a friend of mine. We were on the subte in the subway, and we were just talking to each other, and there weren't even that many people. And then we came out off of the subway, and in the station, he was just like grabbing his backpack, and he was sensing it, and he said, "Shit, man, my MacBook is gone." It's like, what? And we didn't notice. We didn't even see anybody, and they were just able to grab his MacBook out of his backpack, and they just got away with that without anybody noticing. I mean, that's the level of skill that you should be prepared for, especially when there's a lot of people around. The pickpocketing is just like a really common thing here, just like any tourist city in Europe. In that sense, it's maybe a little bit more here, but yeah, that's one of the downsides, I think. And
That's
if you,
insane.
yeah, and if you stay here for a longer period of time, yeah, one of the downsides could be that like people tend to get this really negative attitude towards life because they're dependent on the local economy, and they're just like super bummed out that everything is going to shit all the time. That can be sort of like a negative sometimes because they only talk about money and prices and how insane everything is. So sometimes that's like you get a little bit tired of that. But for the rest, I'd say if you just focus on your own living and your own income, then and of course I have a lot of local friends, and they're trying to get by. I have a lot of friends that I also helped with jobs, etc. So yeah, I mean, you can definitely get by even as a local as long as you speak a little bit of English or learn how to code. There's just tons of opportunities staying here versus leaving.
Hmm. Can we double down on the safety in Argentina and Buenos
Hmm.
Aires a little bit? Because people just ask about it constantly.
Oh
So,
yeah, yeah, that's fine. So yeah, one of the things that is it's always in the news here. It's like the main news item is like, oh, there was this kidnapping here or somebody got shot here, and usually it's always in the what they call the conurbano, which is the outer ring of the city, which is where most of the people live. So every day, millions of people have to go to the center of Buenos Aires from those areas to work, and then they go back at the end of the day. And in those areas, it's just like mainly working class or lower middle class people living there, and there's just like a ton of stuff going on. But as a tourist, you would never ever go to these places. I mean, I've been to most of them, and it's still okay. But shit happens all the time there, and that's just a fact of life. Like cars getting hijacked and all that kind of stuff. So that does happen, but it gets so much airplay that when you actually look at the numbers on paper and you compare them to the states, Argentina is way safer than the states in terms of homicide rates and all that kind of stuff. So also, of course, a lot of robberies are underreported, probably. So I'm not sure like how reliable those statistics are. But from a personal perspective and feeling safe, I never ever feel unsafe in Buenos Aires. And I've lived in Sao Paulo and I've been to Rio many times. And there sometimes you can just feel it in the air. It's like, oh yeah, shit, I have to really be on guard because shit can go wrong or whatever, or I just need to check, not walk by those dudes there because you never know. That kind of stuff here is really rare, and it almost never happened. And even when, like, I've been in two situations too, where this one dude, after I think it was a Metallica concert, I was just going home waiting for the bus, and this dude came up to me with a knife, and he was just like, "Oh yeah, hand over your shit," and I was like, "No, dude, I don't have anything." And then he just left. It's always like they're always trying to be really macho, but if you're reasonably big like me, they won't fuck around with you. It's not like they're going to drop a gun on you and you have to drop everything. Of course, if I see that somebody's truly insane, I'm not going to argue with them. But overall, anytime that happened, it was always just like no, and they
hmm
would just leave. So it's really your reaction too. And it happened once to my wife as well, where we were just walking, and a couple cornered us, and they were just started to talk, and that's always like a red flag. If they out of the blue somebody starts talking to you and you don't really know what they want, you should be like on high alert, because that's usually like a
Like a
scam of some
distraction.
sort. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then they started pulling on a purse, and she just started screaming. It's like, ah, get the fuck out of here. And then, they left. So, if you're like paralyzed and you get really scared or whatever, they might get away with it. But, usually it doesn't get that far.
Okay. I got like less than 5 minutes before I got to get going, so I'll hit you
Okay.
with some rapid fire questions. Just give me some rapid fire answers.
Okay.
What are your favorite spots in the country?
Salta, Mendoza, and Mar del Plata.
Mar del Plata. What are the best beaches in Argentina?
I would say Carilo, Mar de las Pampas, and Mar Azul.
What about Tuyu?
I've been there once, but it's an okay beach, but it's like right on the corner of the where the river and the ocean meet. So
Hmm.
the beaches are a little bit more rivery, and also the town is pretty shitty. So I didn't really like it because of that, because it was just like all kind of
Okay.
falling apart. And the other places that I mentioned are really, really nice. Like they have forest right next to the sea, and the houses there you can rent are just insane.
Okay. And one more time, those give us those names.
So Mar Azul, Mar de las Pampas, Carilo, and basically anything from that point up until Mar del Plata is really good.
Okay. Cool. For single guys, where should they go? What's the best city?
Single guys, probably Mar del Plata in high season and Buenos Aires.
Oh,
And
really? Ooh.
yeah, and if you're more adventurous, I would say Tucumán. Just take some time there to live, and then really check out the nightlife there. It's not crazy in terms of the amount of options, but I think for single guys, the women there can be pretty interesting.
Tucumán. In just a couple sentences, how would you break down the differences between Tucumán, Salta, and Jujuy, which are kind of like the big three cities, I guess, in that northwest region?
Yeah, so the further north you get, like the more indigenous it gets, and the closer to Bolivia. So it's more of an overlapping culture. So Tucumán, which is furthest south, is like sort of on the frontier of still like very Western and just crazy nightlife and crazy people, which are so much fun. Like seriously, if you go there, it's like you just can't stop laughing if you're amongst Tucumanos. They're just like really funny. And then Salta is already a little bit more traditional, like way more Catholic, and yeah, it's kind of rigid society in that sense, like
Mm,
Salta City. And then up north, even more, it's like very traditional. So I would say Salta is very nice for visiting and doing tourist kind of things, but for nightlife, etc., I would prefer Tucumán.
okay, definitely makes sense. Sweet, Mister BowTiedMara. Yeah, let's give you a minute to just promote SovSpot.com again and any places that you want to direct the audience.
So yeah, if you want to follow me on Twitter, that's just at BowTiedMara, and I'll keep you updated there on any developments on SovSpot and things going on in Argentina. I also have a Substack. That's bowtiedmara.substack.com. That's where I write most about, background stories around Argentine politics and history, and also some other Latin American countries every now and again. And I'm trying to focus that also a little bit more on entrepreneurial possibilities in the southern cone of South America.
Sweet man. Yeah, I'm definitely down to buy a yerba mate plantation one day.
Oh, yeah,
So
that would be awesome. That would be a great thing to have.
it's on the list. Sweet. And sovspot.com, that's SovSpot. Really looking forward to what you guys build out there. And I promise I'll write some articles for it soon.
Awesome. That would be great.
Sweet. This has been another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Hope everyone enjoyed it.